I'd like to welcome you all to the workshop today, and hope that we'll be able to explore a number of very pertinent issues to do with workforce development, especially around recruitment and retention in this sector. And as we know, they are major issues and they present us with some major challenges, and all the research tends to suggest that those challenges are going to intensify over the next period of time rather than the reverse. I thought I'd take an opportunity before we start the formal program just to give you a bit of an overview of DISTSS itself. One of the great concerns about DISTSS is its name. It stands for the Disability In-Service Training Support Service, and if you listen to the number of services and supports in that, you can sense our problem. So we're currently undertaking a process where we're going to change our name. It's become even more pertinent this week when someone rang us and asked to talk to DISTSS, so you can sense the problems we have with it. But what we have undertaken in the last year is a considerable strategic development process. We consulted over 900 people or organisations in that process, and our core business, as you can see there, is to enhance learning and development practice within both the community services sector and the for-profit sector to optimise outcomes for people with a disability. So we're basically an organisation that looks at learning and development and how that can enable organisations to better service people with a disability, to meet their needs and to assist them to live the lives they want, and in a broader sense, the entire gamut of diversity. There are a number of issues that we've identified about how learning and development can be successful for organisations, and we will be running a range of strategies over the next 2 years to look at this. But in terms of establishing a learning and development culture, which we're very much about in an organisational sense, there are a number of parameters that need to be addressed. The first is that an organisation needs to acknowledge that they need to grow in that area, that they need to develop their capacity in terms of learning and development. They need to be prepared to change. They need to have a leadership team which is strong, supportive, visionary, and able to see the benefits of that. They need to be able to support all members of their organisations, whether that be clients, leadership, the workforce in general, carers, any other groups with whom they're engaged in learning and development activities, and help them to apply that when they return to the workplace or whatever. So it's about developing a culture where we can apply things we've learnt rather than going and learning a whole lot of things and then getting back to our organisation and not being able to apply them or use that as knowledge, skills, etc. That's one of the biggest blockers to the effectiveness of training in any industry, is that people go off and learn things and then they return to their organisation and are not able to apply them. After about 6 months they've forgotten about them. What they haven't forgotten about is a level of frustration that they've developed as part of that process. The other things that are important organisationally is a belief that everyone can learn, that every employee, that every client, that every other person associated with an organisation can learn, and the importance of framing mistakes and setbacks as learning opportunities rather than something that needs to be looked at in a way that it's held against a person or it's seen as a black mark. If we frame mistakes in that way, then we don't learn anything from them, and we tend to then personalise them. That has some HR implications too. The last point we've got here with learning and development may in fact in some ways be the most important. Learning and development needs to be strongly linked to economic benefit and indeed to the outcomes of the organisation. It can't float around in the ether as the feel-good part of the organisation where people get a bit of training and it's all lovely and we pat each other on the back and go back. It needs to have a very hard wire in to economic benefit and, as I say, in terms of achieving the outcomes of the organisation. And we will certainly be looking at those areas. These are some of the ways that we will, I won't go into these in enormous detail today, but these are some of the ways that we'll be looking to inform the sector, create dialogue in the sector and build resources for the sector in terms of learning and development over the next 2 to 3 years. We are developing a resource which is called Leadership, Learning and Development. I appreciate it's impossible for people here to see that, so my apologies, which is going to try and bring together all of the areas of leadership, learning and development practice. And we see that part of that may be a traditional hard copy resource, but we also see that it may be online resources. It may be groups like this. It could be community forums that we run. The totality of a resource is not the totality of a piece of paper, which is a traditional way of doing it. That's one component in a dynamic resource, and a dynamic resource needs all of those other things and needs to be able to change and evolve. But we'll be looking at part of that, and as you can see from that diagram, we would look at everything there from the governance levels of organisations through to practices that are quite specific, such as mentoring, other areas that impact enormously on this sector, such as the CSTP review that's being conducted at the moment into the training framework that we use, through to possibilities around IT provision, etc. There are an enormous range of strategies which we hope to bring together that can form the totality of learning and development. These, as I said, have to then be linked organisationally to real outcomes and to economic benefit. We need to be able to show increasingly that learning, development, training, etc. changes the fundamentals around economics and around service outcome improvement, and that's a vital thing for us. I'm going to end with that sort of little brief overview of DISTSS, but I'd encourage people to go to our website to see our strategic direction. I know that it's not the usual thing that people think about doing, and think I've got a spare 5 minutes, I'll look up someone's strategic plan. But I'd encourage you to have a brief look at our website and to follow areas that may be of interest, which is, I guess, what we all do in terms of looking at websites. There's many resources there, and there will be a lot more in the future. I'd like to very much thank you for your participation today. I'll hand over to Catherine now, who will introduce the day in more specific detail. So thank you for your attendance.